Hello everybody, this is AK. I'm back. So the topic for this evening's video, madness, utter madness. So the results for Singapore savings bonds is out, right? So it's oversubscribed, right? 2 times oversubscribed, right? So $1 billion on offer, $1.9 billion applied for, right? 3.4% per annum, 10 years average yield, way too attractive, right? Way too attractive. Some people say, oh, but it's not that high. Why is it so attractive? Well, there's a lot of talk that interest rates have peaked, and that's another reason why the stock prices of our local banks, DBS, OCBC, and UOB, have been showing signs of weakness, right? Because if interest rates have peaked, then of course the banks might see their net interest margins compressing, right? So that is something that people are worried about. So of course, if it's true that interest rates have peaked, then we want to lock in higher interest rates now, and not for the short term, but for the longer term. Right, so it's true that T-bills might still be paying higher interest, but that's only for 6 months or maybe 1 year, right? Whereas Singapore savings bond, you lock it in for 10 years, right? So you can accept a slightly lower yield or interest, like say 0.3, 0.4% lower per annum, but you lock this in for 10 years. 3.4% per annum, right? So it seems that everyone's thinking the same way. It's not wrong to think like that, right? So if this continues, if this thinking becomes a group think kind of thing, and everyone thinks the same way, then we can expect Singapore savings bonds to continue to be oversubscribed in the coming months, right? So it really depends on how things unfold from here on, right? So thankfully, everyone's allotted at least $20,000, and since my application that I put in was for $20,000, I got my application filled. Right, I redeemed a couple of Singapore savings bonds which I bought earlier that were offering lower 10-year average yields, and I got the money put into this Singapore savings bond, which offering some 10% higher in 10 years average yield. So that makes me happy, right? That makes me happy. And the second thing I want to talk about is building bond component. And of course, this is something I've talked about on and off for a while now, and that is to build an investment grade bond component in my investment portfolio, and how I'm increasing exposure to investment grade bonds, specifically in the way of Singapore savings bonds and T-bills. And this is continuing. I think is something that is prudent to do, because in 2024 we might see a recession. Even if a recession doesn't come, growth is likely to stay sluggish, like Mr. Lee Hsien Loong says. And having a larger cash position is probably a good thing, so that we can capitalize on opportunities, right? And so that brings us to the third point. Some people want to know how large is my war chest, right? I mean, I share in my blog about my largest investments and all that, but not my entire portfolio in great detail. And if I do share, then of course the cash position should be part of that portfolio. But I have reviewed that most of the money in the war chest are in T-bills, and it's also in high yield account like the UOB1 account, and there's some money in fixed deposits. Just off the top of my head, I think my war chest, if I put all those money together right now, is probably in excess of $200,000. Not quite $300,000 yet, but it's in excess of $200,000. Then, as a percentage of my entire portfolio is very roughly maybe 10% of my portfolio, that kind of thing, right? But I know why people want to ask this question is that they want to have a yardstick that they can follow. But please don't use me as a yardstick, right? Don't use me as a yardstick, because very long time readers of my blog, for example, remember that my war chest just before the global financial crisis was much larger than what it is today. It was in excess of $300,000. Then when global financial crisis came along, I emptied my war chest, right? And back in those days, my portfolio was a lot smaller. And having more than $300,000 back then meant that my cash position was a very much larger percentage of my entire portfolio, right? I wasn't as much invested back then. Right. So the thing is, all of us have different circumstances. For me, frankly speaking, I would like to have a much larger war chest right now, right, than what I have. But the fact is, the last 8 years I've been unemployed, right? So I live off my passive income. I consume most of my passive income. So my war chest couldn't grow as quickly, and it still cannot grow as quickly as, you know, the time when I was employed and had an earned income. All right, and also there is also the fact that my emergency fund, the size of my emergency fund has actually grown. This might sound counterintuitive, but you might remember that I said I am setting aside more money for myself to spend and also for parental support due to inflation, right? So because of that, that means the money I require on a yearly basis has gone up, right? And that also means that the money I have to put aside in my emergency fund has to grow, which is why I've cautioned people before that once you have an emergency fund, don't think that our job is done. We have to stress test from time to time whether the emergency fund is still sufficient, right? Maybe once every year or 2 years we have to stress test. All right, and for me, I say I set aside enough emergency fund to cover like 24 months of expenses. All right, that means 2 years of expenses. So in one of my latest blog posts, I say $48,000 for me, $48,000 for my parents, so it's about $100,000, right? And of course, I still want to do CPF contribution on a yearly basis, that kind of thing. But the emergency fund is really just to cover expenses. The CPF thing, if I don't have the money to do it, I don't have the money to do it, right? So if it's just expenses, about $100,000 per year. So if I have 2 years worth of emergency fund, that's $200,000. Right, so my size of my emergency fund has also grown, which means that my war chest cannot grow even faster. So it's growing at an even slower pace. So that's point number 4 about different cash positions. So the war chest and the emergency funds, there are 2 different cash positions, not to be mixed up. Right, don't think that we don't have a war chest. We should dip into our emergency fund to buy stocks, for example, because if things should go terribly wrong and we happen to use our emergency fund for investments, well, we'll be in a bad situation, right? So anyway, title of this video, madness, and it's madness in more ways than one, right? Singapore savings bonds oversubscribed twice, two times over, right? And how building a bond component is probably prudent given the madness that could be descending upon us in the not too distant future. And how large is my war chest? That's also madness, because some people think, oh, that's 200,000, 300,000 is a lot of money. No, it depends on our circumstances and how large our portfolio is. And then, of course, madness about, some people say it's madness that you have so much in emergency fund. I say, oh, but no, I'm a retiree. I depend on my passive income. Right, and this is just being prudent. But like I say, this is the way I do things. It's never my way or the highway. You have to find your own way, right? So if AK can talk to himself, so can you. Bye-bye.